They warned Ivy that the Alpha King could smell fear. "Keep your gaze on the floor," they said. "Let your hands move. Let your tongue stay still, and his eyes will slide over you like smoke." She believed them until she saw him. Alexander sat on his throne of carved wolfstone, armor dark as a storm, braids falling over his shoulders. The lords around him bickered with moving mouths and waving hands, but he only watched. His expression carved from ice, no flinch at a slammed goblet, no turn of the head at a shouted insult. It was not the calm of a predator. It was the stillness of a man who had never heard his own name. She had seen wounds hidden under furs, fever beneath dry skin, rot beneath polished armor. This felt the same kind of wrong. Her gaze caught on his ear, on the small unnatural tightness there, and something in her answered like a tug on a thread. She was only a maid, an omega who survived by folding herself smaller than her shadow. Yet when fate placed her at his shoulder, close enough to feel his heat through steel, her fingers lifted, one soft touch, one forbidden reach toward his ear, and the silence ruling their king began to crack. Stones remember everything. That was the first lesson she had learned in the village. Their cottage had been built of river rock, stacked by ancestors whose names she never knew. In winter, when the winds clawed at the shutters, she would press her palms to the walls and pretend she could feel the stories caught there. Lullabies, arguments, whispered prayers to a moon that never answered. Omegas like her were the soft echoes in those stones, useful, forgettable, traded along with goats and sacks of grain. Her father had given her away the first time when she was 13. A merchant's wife wanted a quiet girl with steady hands, and she had both. She lasted 3 summers in that house, moving from hearth to barn to sickbed, until one wrong touch changed everything. The woman's son had fallen from a horse. His leg was twisted and swollen. The village healer had been summoned and was slow to arrive. The boy wailed, sweat slick on his brow, and everyone shouted at once, "Too many hands, too much fear." She saw the way his foot dangled. Wrong, something inside her, some deep inconvenient knowing, rose up like a tide. "Do not move him," she said. No one listened. When the healer finally came, he took one look, muttered about breakage and misalignment, then grabbed the boy's leg to snap it straight. She saw it before it happened. The angle, the force, the way the bone would splinter instead of set. Her mouth opened of its own will. "Stop," she begged. "You will ruin it. You must pull this way instead." The crack was loud enough to silence the room. The boy's scream was worse. The healer turned on her first, then the merchant's wife. An omega who dared correct a healer was an omega looking for trouble, and they were all too happy to give it to her. When the boy's leg failed to heal right, when he limped and cursed his fate, they traced that crooked future back to her warning and called it a curse. She learned then what happened to girls who interfered. After that house cast her out, others took her in for a time. A shepherd's family who needed extra hands, an old widow who could no longer lift her buckets, a drunken innkeeper who pinched more than coin. Each place taught her a new way to be small. Eyes down, voice soft, hands busy. She stopped speaking when she saw wrongness. She stopped reaching for fevers, for bad joints, for the sharp glint of sickness that shone in people's eyes before their bodies ever faltered. She still felt it, though that tug under her skin, the one that told her where pain lived inside someone, she just learned to ignore it. By the time she reached the fortress, her life had been whittled down to fits and starts between other people's needs. She arrived clutching a small bundle of clothes, dust in her hair, and stubborn hope in her chest. The steward eyed her papers. sniffed her scent, and nodded. "You'll do," he said, which in her world was the closest thing to a blessing. The fortress was nothing like the cottages and cramped houses she had served in. It rose from the cliffs like a stone beast, all teeth and towers watching the sea. Smoke from 100 hearths gave the air a permanent taste of ash. Wolves howled from the outer courtyards at dusk, their cries echoing off walls that had seen too many winters and too much blood. Inside, she became one more shadow in gray wool. The maids lived above the kitchens where the heat never quite left the stone, even at night. Dawn began with the clang of pails and the hiss of boiling water. They scrubbed floors until their hands felt more like raw rope than skin. They polished candelabra, changed rushes, hauled firewood, and carried trays up and down narrow stairwells until their legs trembled. It was easy in such a place to disappear. That suited her. But disappearing did not mean she stopped seeing. The first time she saw Alexander, she was carrying linens past the open doors of the great hall. She did not need to be told it was him. He sat on the throne as if the stone had grown around him, broad shoulders encased in dark armor, hair braided down his back, profile carved in sharp, unforgiving lines. Lords and captains stood in a semicircle below the dais, mouths moving. She heard nothing from where she walked, but she watched him closely through the veil of her lowered lashes. He did not tilt his head when someone spoke. He did not flinch at a hand slamming the arm of a chair or at the slap of a palm against a table. His gaze moved from face to face, controlled and assessing. But there was a distance in it she recognized too well. The look of someone standing behind a window, watching life happen on the other side. The others called him many things: Wolf King, Silent Storm, Moon-marked. In the servants' quarters they whispered that he was blessed by the goddess with a warrior's body and cursed with a deaf man's ears. Some said it made him more terrifying, that he could stare through a man without reacting to pleas or threats. Some said it made him pitiable. She watched him and saw neither blessing nor curse. She saw a man who had learned to read the world without sound, the way he tracked mouths, not voices, the way he watched hands and shoulders, the way his jaw tightened a breath before someone lost their temper, as though he could feel the swell of anger in the air. Loneliness clung to him like a second cloak. In the days that followed, her path crossed his shadow more often than the man himself. She glimpsed him on the battlements speaking with his commanders, in the training yard, where swords crashed in practice noise she could hear even from the laundry yard, though he reacted only to movement and impact. In the chapel, kneeling in the blue wash of stained glass light, his head bowed, lips motionless. Each time that old unwelcome sense stirred in her, the one that had ruined her life once already, when a kitchen girl burned her arm on an oven stone. She felt the throb before the girl cried out. Her hands moved on their own, guiding cool cloth, knowing exactly where to press, how long to hold, when to ease. The blister never rose. She called it luck. She called it a reminder. When the stableman limped past her one evening, his gait just slightly off, she knew his hip would seize before the first frost. She said nothing. When she carried wine to a chamber where an old noble coughed into embroidered linen, her skin prickled with the knowledge that if he kept drinking from that same cup, he would not live to see spring. Her fingers tightened on the tray, then relaxed. It was not her place. It was never her place. And yet every time she saw Alexander's profile, that same instinct nodded in her chest, sharp and insistent. Something is wrong, it said. Not with his hands, not with his stride, but with the quiet wrapped around him. His silence was not smooth. It was tight, distorted, like cloth stretched over a hidden, jagged shape. The healers called it fate. The servants called it curse. The lords called it advantage. But the longer she watched him, the more certain she became. Whatever bound his ears was not born of the gods. It was placed there, the way a stone is set in a wall. She lay awake at night on her narrow pallet above the kitchens, listening to the crackle of banked coals and the soft breathing of other maids, and tried to push that certainty away. She reminded herself of the boy with the ruined leg, of the look in the healer's eyes when he turned the village against her. She repeated the promise she had made the day she left that house. Never interfere again. Stones remember everything, so do scars. But as the days turned and the moon carved her patient path across the sky, another truth became harder to ignore. If she could feel what others refused to see, if her hands and instincts were the only tools she had in this life, then perhaps some wounds were not meant to be left alone, especially when they belonged to a king who had never heard his own kingdom breathe. The hall emptied in pieces. First the lords, leaving in a rustle of cloaks and bruised pride. Then the captains barking orders that suddenly seemed afraid to shout too loudly. Even the servants scattered like frightened birds clutching empty platters, pretending not to stare at their king who sat frozen on the throne, one hand pressed to his ear as if the world itself was screaming into it. Only she remained on the dais. Her fingers were sticky with whatever strange thing she had pulled from his ear, wrapped hastily in the corner of her apron. Her knees prickled, waiting for the stone to open beneath her and swallow her whole. It was not the stone that moved. It was the guards. One of them growled, gauntlet closing around her upper arm. She stumbled up, the world sharp and too bright. Somewhere below them, voices clanged loud. Shocked, too loud for a hall that had seen blood spilled and oaths broken, she risked a glance at Alexander. His eyes were not on them. They were on her. Before, his gaze had felt like cold steel sliding over the room. Now it burned, pinned, searching. He blinked as if even that small sound startled him, then jerked his chin once. "Bring her," he said. She had never heard his voice before. It was low, roughened at the edges, like stones tumbled in a riverbed. It rolled through the air and wrapped around her bones. For an absurd heartbeat, she forgot that words could kill. She only thought, so this is what he sounds like. Then the guards were dragging her from the hall, and the moment shattered. They climbed narrow stairs, each footstep echoing off the spiral walls. Her heart tried to climb faster, ramming against her ribs. She could still see his face when sound first hit him, the way his eyes had gone wide, the way he had flinched from the crackling torches as if they had grown teeth. She had done that to him. Fool, she thought. Interfering fool. The guards said nothing. They did not need to. Their fingers bit into her arms hard enough to promise bruises. At the top of the stairs, a heavy door stood open, guarded by 2 more wolves in steel. Beyond lay a chamber she had only ever glimpsed from afar, the Alpha King's private den. They threw her inside as if tossing scraps to a beast. The door shut with a boom that made her jump. The room was large but felt smaller for the weight of him in it. Tapestries covered the stone, wolves and moons and long-dead kings watching in woven silence. A broad table stood near the windows, maps and tokens scattered across it. Weapon racks lined one wall, a great bed another. Alexander stood with his back to her, hands braced on the table. His armor was gone. In its place he wore a dark tunic that clung to his shoulders and the long muscles of his back. His hair fell in 2 heavy braids. "You may leave," he said. The words were for the guards, but they vibrated through the room, through her. The door opened, closed. They were alone. Her mouth went dry. This was worse than facing him in front of the court. Alone. There would be no witnesses to whatever judgment he chose. An alpha king did not need an audience to make a girl disappear. He did not turn at once. She watched his shoulders rise and fall, slow and deliberate, as if he was listening to the room breathe. His head tilted slightly like a wolf catching a new scent. "I can hear the sea," he said at last. Voice low, through the stone. "I never knew how loud it was," she swallowed. "Your Majesty, do not speak yet." He lifted one hand, a command more than a gesture. "I want to hear it. The room, without your voice." So she stood. He listened. The fire snapped in the hearth. Cloth rustled in the slight draft. Somewhere above, a shutter creaked, protesting the wind. Her own breathing sounded too harsh to her ears. To his, it must have been a storm. He turned then. His eyes were the same color as before, storm gray, ringed in darker steel, but something restless now moved behind them. Not the distant calculation she had seen from the shadows of the hall, but a raw, bewildered alertness, as if every part of him had been forced awake at once. He took one step toward her. The boards under his boots made a faint, complaining sound. His gaze flicked down as though the floor's voice surprised him. "What," he asked quietly, "did you do to me?" Her body wanted to crumple into a bow. Instead, she forced herself to stand straight. Hands knotted in her apron. She had touched him without permission. Whatever happened now, she owed him truth. "I removed something." "Sire," she said. Her voice shook. She could hear it, thin and frayed. "From your ear." His jaw clenched. "I know that much." She swallowed, throat dry. It did not belong there. He closed the distance between them with 2 long strides. He stopped so close she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. She smelled leather and clean sweat and a faint edge of iron, like blood remembered. "Do you think I have not had healers poking at my ears since I could stand?" he asked. "Do you think a maid saw what they could not?" The words were sharp, but underneath them she heard something else, now that her terror parted just enough to let sound through. Hurt, disbelief, a tremor he was trying to grind flat with anger. "I do not know what they saw, Your Majesty," she whispered. "I only know what I felt." His eyes narrowed. Felt. Yes. Her fingers twitched around the scrap of cloth in her hand. She forced them open, revealing the small, dried, twisted thing wrapped inside. The strange object that had lain in his ear like a stone lodged in a riverbank. "When I stood behind you in the hall, something pulled at me here." She touched the center of her chest, like it does when a bone is set wrong or a fever hides under the skin. It was wrong. I could feel it even before I saw it. He stared at the object in her palm. For a long moment he said nothing. The fire cracked. The wind pressed against the window, moaning faintly. Then, he asked so softly she almost missed it. "You decided to put your hands on your king in front of the entire court because something felt wrong?" "I decided," she said, voice barely more than breath, "that I would rather die trying to fix what I could not bear to watch than live knowing I stayed still." The confession fell between them, heavier than stone. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure it shook her ribs. His gaze lifted from her hand to her face. "Say that again," he murmured. Her lips felt clumsy. "I would rather die." "No." He stepped closer still until the hem of her dress brushed his boots. "Not the words, the way you said them." She blinked, confused. "I do not understand." His eyes darkened, intent. "Your voice, it changed." It took her a moment to grasp what he meant. His hearing was new. Every quiver, every break, every breath was a discovery. He was studying her the way a child studies letters, sounding out meaning in every curve. He lifted his hand slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. His fingers hovered near her throat, not quite touching. When you spoke of dying, your voice shook here, he said, but when you said you could not bear to watch, it steadied. Her skin burned under his scrutiny. Because that part is worse, she admitted hoarsely. His hand dropped. He stepped back as if the distance would help him think. I can hear your heart, he said. It is loud. Heat climbed her neck. I am afraid. I know. His mouth twisted in something that was not quite a smile. Mine is louder. The thought startled her enough that her eyes flew to his chest. She could not hear his heartbeat from where she stood, but perhaps he meant the rush in his own ears, the same storm he had described in the hall. He turned away, pacing once, twice, the floor complaining softly under his steps. Healers told me the gods took my hearing at birth, he said, that what is stolen by the moon cannot be returned by mortal hands. He looked back at her. Yet you? His gaze dropped again to the cloth in her palm. Shadows gathered in his expression. Do you know what this is? No, Your Majesty. Neither do I. His jaw flexed, but I intend to find out. He came back to stand before her, all uncertainty buried now beneath the returning mantle of a king. His newly awakened senses did not make him smaller. If anything, they sharpened the edges of his presence. You will not be sent away, he said. Shock stole her breath. What? His eyes held hers, unblinking. Until I understand what was done to me and how you undid part of it, you will remain in this fortress. Near. His mouth curved, not in warmth, but in something like grim practicality. I need someone whose words I can hear and trust are not practiced performances. Your fear makes you honest. That stung, but it was also, she knew, the only reason she was still breathing. You will continue your duties. He went on, but when I summon you, you will come. If this thing in my ear was placed there, I will need a guide. He seemed to taste the word as unfamiliar as any new sound. Someone who feels what others miss. I am only a maid, she said weakly. He studied her a long moment. You are the first person who has ever changed the world beneath my skin. Her throat tightened. She bowed her head at last because she did not know what to do with that. As you command, my king. He exhaled slowly. The sound was softer than the sea, but she heard it. Go, he said. For now, before your heart bursts from your chest. She backed toward the door, legs shaking. Her hand closed around the scrap of cloth and its terrible secret as she slipped out into the corridor. One thought beat louder than her pulse. She had gone into the wolf's den, expecting to die. Instead, she had been claimed, not as prey, not yet as anything so gentle as beloved, but as something far more dangerous. She had become necessary. The fortress did not grow quieter once Alexander began to hear it. It only grew more honest. On the first morning after the hall incident, she was summoned not to the great chamber or the kitchens, but to a smaller room off the main corridor, a study with high, narrow windows and shelves lined with scrolls he had probably never bothered to read. A fire burned low in the hearth, gnawing at a stump of wood. He stood by the window when she entered, back straight, hands clasped behind him. No armor today, just a dark tunic, leather bracers, and a tension that seemed to hold every muscle a breath away from snapping. Close the door, he said without turning. The latch clicked louder than she expected. He flinched only slightly, but she saw it. Everything is loud, he muttered. Even my own kingdom. She stayed near the door, unsure how close she was allowed to stand when he was not demanding answers about mysterious objects lodged in his flesh. "It can be," she said, "if you do not know what you are hearing." He looked over his shoulder then, studying her with that new sharpness, as if he could listen with his eyes as well as his ears. "You said you would rather die than stay still," he said. "Prove you meant it." Her throat tightened. "How?" "Teach me." He gestured vaguely at the room, at himself, at the stone around them. All of this. She had taught children in the village once how to hear the river's warning rush before it flooded, how to listen for wolves in the tree line. But teaching a king to listen was another thing entirely. Still, she stepped away from the door. If the moon had placed her in this madness, she would not dishonor her by cowering. "Start with the fire," she said. He frowned. "The fire? It has a voice?" She walked to the hearth, motioning him closer. "Listen." He came to stand beside her, nearer than was comfortable, closer than she dared call proper. His arm brushed hers. The contact sent a bright, treacherous heat through her. She focused on the flames. "Do you hear that sharp crack?" she asked. "That is where the wood is driest. The softer hiss is the sap boiling away. It tells you how long the log will last." He tilted his head, eyes narrowed. "Yes, there is more than one sound." "Good." She could not help the small smile that tugged at her mouth. "Now the chimney. Listen higher." His gaze lifted, following the line of stone. The wind tugged at the smoke, making it moan low and hollow. His brows drew together. "It is sad," he said slowly. "Lonely," she corrected gently. "That's the wind complaining about being trapped." Something eased in his shoulders, as if the world had just become a fraction less hostile by being named. That became their pattern in the days that followed. When he summoned her, it was always to some corner of the keep, never the grand hall, never the chapel, places where sound pulled and curled, a stairwell where footsteps overlapped, a balcony where sea and wind argued, the quiet before dawn in the training yard, when the dew still made the grass hold its breath. "This," she would say, pointing toward a distant clatter, "is armor being stacked, not worn? Hear how it tumbles." "And this," he would counter, tipping his head toward the courtyard. "Hooves. Yes, but 2 horses, not 3. She would listen, then nod. "You are learning faster than I did. You were born to it," he replied once. "I am only now meeting my own kingdom." Sometimes the lessons were simple, almost laughably so. The difference between a door closing in anger and a door gently caught by a patient hand. The sound of honest laughter in the servants' hall versus the brittle clink of forced mirth at a feast. The hiss of a blade sliding from its sheath compared to the scrape of metal being polished. Other times they felt like walking a cliff edge. One evening he called her to his chamber just as the torches were being lit along the inner wall. Shadows pulled in the corners, thick and soft. He sat at the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, staring at his open hands as if they were strangers. "It will not stop," he said without preamble. "The noise, even when the room is empty." She hesitated in the doorway. "What do you hear?" He shook his head, jaw tight. "Everything. The fire, the guards outside, the sea, my own breath. I cannot tell where one ends and the next begins." His voice was wrong, too fast, too thin. She felt the edge of it along her nerves. "Panic, may I?" she asked, stepping closer. He did not look up, but he did not forbid her. She took that as permission and came to stand in front of him. From this angle, with his head bowed, the braids framed his face, making him look younger, almost uncertain. "Alexander," she said softly, "look at me." His eyes snapped up, blown wide. "It's too loud," he rasped. "The world is too loud and I cannot—" "Give the noise somewhere to go," she said. "Trust me." She took his hands, both of them, in hers. It was a boldness that would have terrified her a week ago. Now terror was a luxury she could not afford. She guided his palms to her chest, laying them flat over her heart. His fingers spanned almost the whole width. The heat of his skin burned through the fabric of her dress. "Feel that?" she asked. He swallowed. "Yes, yes, that is me. Not the sea, not the guards, not the fire. Just me." She drew a slow breath in, letting her ribs expand painstakingly. "Breathe with my heart, in when it beats twice, out for the third." "This is foolish," he muttered, but his hands did not pull away. "Then humor your foolish maid," she murmured. "In, out, listen only here." His chest rose, fell, rose again. At first his breath stuttered, catching on the edges of fear. Gradually the rhythm settled. Her heartbeat slowed with his, or perhaps his slowed with hers. The roar in his eyes dimmed, leaving something rarer, more fragile. "What do you hear now?" she asked after several cycles. He stared at her, gaze dropping briefly to their joined hands before returning to her face. "You," he said quietly. "Only you." The room felt suddenly too small. Her own lungs forgot their lesson. Stumbling, his hands moved, whether by accident or intent, sliding over the curve of her ribs as her breath hitched. "Your voice changes," he added. "Softer still. When you are frightened for me, it sharpens. When you are frightened of me, it thins." Just now it did something else. Heat rushed to her cheeks. "I am not used to kings touching me." "Sire, kings," he said, as if tasting the word. "You say it as if I am made of stone. You are not stone." The admission slipped out before she could bite it back. Stone does not flinch when a door slams. Stone does not hold its breath when it hears a maid's footsteps approach. His fingers curled, unconsciously pressing her closer. Her heart, the traitor, leapt against his palms. "And what does a maid do?" he asked quietly. "When her king will not let go because her heart is the only sound that makes sense." Her mouth parted, but no words came. Instead, she placed her own hand over his, anchoring them where they lay. It was a dangerous answer, but an honest one. They stayed like that longer than was wise. Long enough for the fire to settle into a steady murmur. Long enough for the corridor beyond the door to fall quiet as the keep slipped toward sleep. Long enough for their breathing to become a single pattern. After that night, the lessons changed. She still taught him the language of the fortress, the distant thunder of hooves on the bridge, the clink of dice in the barracks. The secretive hush of conspirators who forgot walls had ears now. But there were more moments when his attention slipped from the world to her. "Say my name again," he would ask, leaning close under the pretense of straining to hear. "Alexander," she would whisper, knowing full well he could have heard her from halfway across the room. Sometimes he would repeat it, testing the weight of each syllable, matching his tone to hers. Her hand on his throat guided the sound, feeling the vibration under his skin. The first time his voice matched her pitch so closely, the air seemed to hum between them. She had to pull away before she did something foolish, like press her lips to the place her fingers had just rested. Duty said she was there to serve, to guide, to steady. Desire said she was already falling. He never spoke of mates. She never spoke of the bond that tugged at her whenever he entered a room. But the space between them grew charged with things unsaid. Glances that lingered a heartbeat too long, hands that brushed when they did not need to. Silence heavy not with absence, but with everything they were too afraid to name. She had promised herself once that she would never interfere again. Then she tore the silence from his ear. Now each lesson in sound felt like a new kind of interference, one that did not merely change his world, but wove hers irrevocably into it. Doors in the fortress were thinner than they looked. She learned this carrying wine to a council antechamber 2 nights after she taught Alexander to breathe with her heart. The corridor outside the war room was nearly empty, all but one torch guttering low. She knew better than to linger near that door. It was where important men muttered important things they did not want maids to hear. But the steward had sent her with a tray for the guards, and the guards had stepped away, and she made the mistake of existing within earshot. "Cannot pretend this is nothing," a clipped voice hissed from the other side of the oak. "Lord Harrow." If she matched tone to the thin knife edge of his mouth. A deaf king is one thing, a hearing one is another beast entirely. A deeper voice, oily with false calm, answered, "Your concern is noted, but the change is done. We cannot pluck the sound back out of his skull." The tray wobbled in her hands. She pressed her back to the cool stone, shadow swallowing her. The urge to flee warred with the part of her that had spent years listening by necessity. Every raised voice a warning, every whispered argument a sign it was time to move on to the next house. "If he starts hearing what is not meant for him," Harrow said, "these walls will not protect us. He will start to ask different questions." "He is still the same man," the other replied. "Trained to see, not hear. He trusts what he reads on faces more than what he takes in through his ears. With careful guidance." "You mean with you whispering in one ear while that little maid has her hands on the other?" Harrow spat the word maid with such disdain she flinched. "Do not think I have not noticed his sudden interest in servants who were meant to remain invisible." Heat shot to her cheeks, shame and fear tangling. She should have walked away. Her feet would not obey. "He relies on her for now," the smoother voice said. "A child clings to the hand that leads him out of a dark room. That does not make the child any less malleable once his eyes adjust. Your metaphors grow more insulting by the day." Harrow sighed. "We paid well to keep his ears closed. Years of coin, years of assurances. If he learns that..." The tray slipped a fraction in her grip. One cup chimed against another, a soft, betraying ring. Silence fell on the other side of the door. Not the empty kind, but the full, poised sort that comes just before steel leaves a sheath. "Did you hear that?" someone muttered. Her heart leapt into her throat. She hurried down the corridor as quietly as a girl with shaking hands could manage. Turning the corner before the door opened, she pressed herself into a servant's niche, breath sawing, listening to footsteps enter the hall. Pause. Retreat. Paid. They had paid someone to keep him deaf. Not the gods, not cruel fate, not some mysterious moon curse. Coin and fear and selfish convenience. By the time she reached the servants' hall, the tray was rattling so hard a cook snatched it from her with a glare. She mumbled an apology, barely hearing the scold. The roar in her ears was her own pulse. In her palate that night, she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alexander's face in the firelight as he tried to separate one sound from another. The way his brow furrowed when the world became too much. The way his features smoothed when she spoke low and even, anchoring him. "He trusts what he reads on faces," the man in the war room had said. True enough, but he had started to trust her voice, too. If healers had been paid to keep him deaf, then every visit he had had as a child, every examination, every patient shake of the head, every "there is nothing to be done," had been a lie bought with gold. His world had been narrowed on purpose. His isolation was not an accident of birth, but a design. Her stomach churned. She thought of the physician who had once called her a curse for daring to question his methods. How easily a village had believed him over a scared Omega girl. If these men discovered she had uncovered their crime without trying, what might they call her? Witch, temptress, manipulator, an Omega using strange gifts to twist the king's mind. The worst part was that some of it, from the outside, might look true. She was spending hours alone with Alexander now, teaching him to listen, to sort sounds, to hear the tremor in a liar's voice. Her scent would cling to his tunics. Her voice would echo in his skull long after she left. If someone wanted a story to turn him against her, they already had all the pieces. She turned on her side, staring at the shadows on the ceiling. Leave, a cold, practical voice inside her whispered. Take what little coin you have. Find a caravan heading south. Vanish into a village where kings are rumors and wolves are only animals, not men. You have interfered enough for one life. Another voice, quieter, stubborn, answered. And what then? What of the man who had placed his hands on her chest like a drowning swimmer grabbing for shore? What of the king whose first true panic had happened in front of her? Not his warriors or council, because he could not bear for them to see him shaken? What of his crooked little smile when he finally matched her tone on his own name? He is still the same man, she whispered to the dark, except he wasn't, not entirely. The old Alexander had ruled in silence, wreathed in rumor. This one was freshly hatched into a world of clamor he had never been prepared for. Sound had stripped some of his armor, not the kind hammered from metal, but the kind built from distance and unknowability. She had seen that unarmored man. She had watched his face soften when he heard the soft mewl of a stable kitten for the first time. Crouching in straw with a look of wonder entirely at odds with his reputation, she had seen exasperation spark in his eyes when two guards tried to whisper about dice games out of his line of sight, only to forget that their voices now betrayed them. Most dangerous of all, she had seen the way his gaze warmed when she entered a room, as if some part of him had learned her footsteps and decided they were a sound worth anticipating. The thought of leaving him in the hands of men who had paid for his brokenness made her chest ache worse than any fear. Yet fear was real. If they had spent years buying his deafness, what would they do to protect that investment? A maid could vanish in a fortress like this. One night scrubbing floors, the next tossed over the cliffs and written off as clumsiness. Omegas were always falling, always losing their footing, always meeting unfortunate ends that no one questioned too closely. She pressed her palm over her racing heart, remembering the weight of his hands there. Give the noise somewhere to go, she had told him. Trust me, he had. If she ran now, she would be throwing that trust back in his face and handing his newly opened ears back to the very people who had tried to keep them closed. The moon sees cowards as clearly as she sees liars, her grandmother used to say. I am tired of being afraid, she whispered. The darkness did not answer, but the words settled in her like a small, stubborn stone. Leaving would be safer. Staying might kill her, but safety had never given anyone back their world. In the morning, when the summons came, one of his pages breathless at the kitchen door, stammering that His Majesty required her presence at once, she wiped her hands, smoothed her apron, and went. Each step up the tower felt like threading a needle through layers of stone and secrets. As she climbed, she heard the keep differently, the hurried, guilty hush when she passed certain doors, the too careful loudness of men laughing near the war room, the brittle chime of fear in the servants' voices when they spoke the word king. Behind it all lay another sound, faint but steady, like a drum beating beneath layers of earth. Alexander's presence, not his heart. She was not yet close enough for that. But the awareness that somewhere above her he was listening too. For his first winter with ears. For lies he had never been allowed to hear before. For the one maid foolish enough to stand between an alpha king and the people who had stolen his silence. At the chamber door she paused for a single breath. "Run," the old fear whispered one last time. She knocked instead. "Names are heavier when you can finally hear them." They were in the map room the first time Alexander told her that. The table between them was littered with wooden tokens carved into wolves and ships, their positions marking borders she would never cross. Outside, rain rattled against the shutters, a steady drumbeat on the stone. "Before," he said. Fingers tracing the edge of the kingdom carved into parchment. All of this was shapes and mouths moving. His thumb dragged across a painted river. They would say, "Our king has spoken." And I would wonder if I had. She stood on the other side of the table, a respectful distance away, holding the tray the steward had insisted she bring. Wine for him, water for her, as if she had been invited here as something more than his strange new tutor. "What do you mean?" she asked. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh in someone else. A man who cannot hear his own voice is always guessing at its reach. He glanced up. "I learned early to move my mouth in the shapes my tutors wanted, to make my jaw firm, my expression unreadable. They assured me I sounded like a king." His gaze drifted back to the map. "But I never knew. To me, my words were just warmth in my throat and air on my tongue. No weight, no echo." She thought of him in the great hall, issuing decrees with a face like carved stone, while the crowd roared reactions he could not feel. A king speaking into fog, hoping the shapes he made reached someone. "It must have been lonely," she said quietly. His hand stilled on the parchment. "You say that as if it were past tense." The rain grew louder, or perhaps the silence between them did. He straightened, pushing away from the table. "When you took that thing from my ear." The first sound I knew as mine was not a cheer or a battle cry. He stepped around the table, each bootfall a deliberate soft thud on the rush-covered floor. It was my own breathing. I thought, so this is the man they call king. Just a creature panting like any other. She wanted to reach for him then, the way she would have for a child who had just learned the sky was not solid. Instead, she gripped the tray tighter. Her hands were safer when they were full. "You are not just any creature," she said. His mouth curved. Not quite in mockery, not quite in gratitude. The Lords say that as well, though they mean it differently. He came to stand beside her, close enough that she could smell rain on his tunic, where droplets had soaked the wool at his shoulders. "When you speak, Ivy, I can hear your doubt and your honesty at war." "That sounds inconvenient," she murmured. "It is clarifying." His gaze dropped to her lips, then flicked away, almost shy. Alexander, shy. The notion was absurd, yet there it was in the slight hitch of his breath. Say something else. Her mind went blank. Of all the words in the fortress, none came. "What should I say?" His voice roughened. "Say it again." What should I say? He closed his eyes. For a long moment he simply stood there listening, as if those 4 plain words held secrets. "It's different when you are not telling me where to listen," he said. "Your voice when you comfort is slow. When you scold the kitchen boys, it sharpens. But when you do not know what to say..." His eyes opened. "It trembles just a little." She did not realize she scolded kitchen boys. She muttered, cheeks heating. "You do many things you do not realize." He took the tray from her hands and set it aside, leaving her fingers empty and exposed. Ivy. There it was again, that shift. The king's mantle slipping a fraction, leaving the man underneath. Yes, your majesty. His jaw flexed. He looked away as if the maps on the wall suddenly fascinated him. When he spoke next, the words were softer than the rain. Say my name. She had said it before, of course, when he asked during lessons, when he needed a model to follow. But there was something different in the request now, an edge of vulnerability that made her pulse stumble. Alexander, she whispered. He inhaled sharply. Again. Alexander. His throat worked, her gaze, traitorous thing, followed the movement. It sounds. He groped for the word, a man used to wielding blades. Not language, different from your majesty. As if you are speaking to a man, not a crown. Would you prefer I did not? No, the answer came too quickly, too raw. His eyes met hers, unguarded. No, I prefer that very much. Something shifted inside her then, like a stone finally rolling into place. She had cared for him before, for his confusion, his pain, his sudden wonder at a world that had always been denied him. But this was different. This was not just wanting him safe. It was wanting to be the one he looked at that way, the one whose voice he marked as separate from the roar of his kingdom. It was the dangerous, traitorous desire to be special to him, not as a tool or necessity, but as Ivy, Omega. The word tasted sour and sweet at once. In this court her nature was a weakness to be exploited, a leash others would happily fasten around his throat through hers. She had seen lords barter their daughters' sense like coin, seen Omegas paraded at feasts, eyes flat as they were offered up as treaties. If they realized what was growing in her, they would not need bribes to control the king. They would only need her. Ivy, Alexander said again, frowning slightly. Your heart is beating. That means I am alive, your majesty. It is beating faster than usual. She cursed his newly sharp ears. Perhaps because you are standing very close. He glanced down as if just noticing the small space between them. His hand lifted, hesitated, then settled on the edge of the table instead of the place on her arm she half expected. Does my nearness frighten you? Yes, she thought. But not the way you mean. It concerns me, she said. Your enemies would be delighted to see you so comfortable with a maid. They are already whispering. His expression darkened. I am aware of their whispers. You do not know all of them, she said. Thinking of the conversation behind the door, the urge to tell him everything surged up again, about payments to healers, about the years stolen from him on purpose, about the way they spoke of him as if he were a child with a new toy, and about her. The part she had heard clearly, the little maid with her hands on the king, her tongue pressed against her teeth, words clamoring. She could tell him now. She should. Alexander must have seen something in her face because his gaze sharpened. You are holding something back. He stepped closer again, and her resolve trembled like a candle in a draught. How was she supposed to confess to betrayal and schemes when he was looking at her as if her honesty were the only light in a room full of shadows? Ivy, he said softly, if you know something. A sharp knock shattered the moment. They both flinched. Enter, Alexander snapped, the king sliding back over him like armor. The steward stepped in, bowing low, eyes flicking from him to her and back in a way that made her skin crawl. Forgive the interruption. Sire, the council awaits your presence in the great hall. For what? The words cracked like a whip. A formal inquiry, the steward said, smoothing his hands down his tunic. regarding recent changes in your condition and the maid involved. His gaze landed fully on her then, greedy and assessing. It seems prudent that her actions be examined before the entire court. The room tilted. Inquiry. Examined. So many polite words for being dragged into the open like prey. Alexander's jaw hardened. Who called it? The lords petitioned as a group. Your Majesty, they are concerned. She could hear the truth hiding beneath that word now. Thanks to her own lessons, concern laced with fear, with hunger, with anticipation. She should have spoken then, should have seized the moment to say they paid to keep you deaf. This is not about me. It is about them losing their hold. Instead, she felt her throat close. What happens if I refuse? Alexander asked. The steward's smile was thin. Refusal would be unwise. Sire, it might suggest you have something to hide. His eyes slid to her again, pupils narrowing as if he could already see her on display before the assembled wolves. Better to face them and put all doubts to rest. Alexander's hand curled into a fist on the table. For a heartbeat, she thought he would overturn it. Send maps and tokens flying. Consequences be damned. Then he inhaled a measured, grudging breath. Very well, he said. Tell them I am coming. The steward bowed himself out. The door clicked shut, the sound neat and final. They were alone again. But the intimacy of a moment before was gone, swallowed by the looming weight of eyes and judgment. Ivy. Alexander looked at her, and there was something almost apologetic in his gaze, an emotion she never expected to see on a king's face. You will stand with me. Her palms were damp, and if they ask questions I cannot safely answer. His jaw set. Then they will learn the sound of a king who has decided he has heard enough. It was a promise and a threat, neither of which she could fully trust to protect her. As they walked toward the hall together, her mind spun circles. Tell him now. Tell him about the coins, the healers, the men behind the door. Tell him about your heart before they use it against you. She opened her mouth. The doors to the great hall swung wide before them, and 100 heads turned. The sound of voices falling abruptly silent crashed over her like a wave. Whatever words she had meant to offer drowned on her tongue. They had dressed the hall for judgment instead of celebration. No banners of victory hung tonight. Only the old standards, wolf and moon and sword, staring down like witnesses. Torches burned along the walls. Their flames turned into spears of light by the polish of the stone. The air tasted of smoke, sweat, and something sharper, the metallic tang of anticipation. Alexander's throne sat high on the dais, but he did not sit when they entered. He stood beside it, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sweeping the room. The murmur that had filled the hall thinned and broke, falling into a hush that felt more dangerous than any shouted threat. The steward led her forward until she stood alone on the bare stone at the center. No tray in her hands, no cloth to busy her fingers, only her own pulse hammering against her ribs. The circle of lords around her parted just enough to keep their fine, boots clean of whatever might spill from this little spectacle. Let it be known, Lord Harrow said, stepping out from the crowd like a blade from a sheath, that this gathering is called in concern for the safety of the realm and the soundness of our king's mind. Murmurs. She heard the falseness in them now, the rehearsed outrage, the pleased fear. Alexander's gaze flicked to Harrow, then to her. He gave no signal, no word, but she felt him listening. To them, to her, to all of it. Harrow turned, robes whispering. The girl, he said, as if she did not already stand before him. Step forward. She did not move. There was nowhere further to go. State your name, he ordered. Ivy, she said. Amazed, her voice came out at all. Omega, Maid of the fortress, and self-appointed healer to the crown. A thin smile cut across his face. You admit you put your hands upon His Majesty during council? Yes. Her fingers curled at her sides. I do. Gasps fluttered at the edges of the hall, false as painted roses. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. And did you have permission to touch our king? Harrow asked. No. The word dropped like a stone into a deep well. He spread his hands, turning to the crowd. There you have it, an Omega unbound, unsworn, laying hands on an Alpha King in the place of law. And for what? We might ask. Compassion? His lip curled, or something more arcane. The word slid through the hall like oil. Arcane. A woman near the pillars made the sign against evil. Someone muttered witch. Someone else. Softer, said curse. Harrow faced Alexander's dais again. Sire, we all saw the result. One moment you sat as you have always sat, calm, controlled, as the gods made you. The next, at the touch of this girl, you clutched your head, flinched at shadows, reacted to noises that were not there. He tilted his head, pitying. How are we to be certain she has not tampered with your mind, with your will? Alexander descended one step from the dais, but no further. My mind remains my own, he said, voice low and even. Speak your accusation plainly. Very well. Harrow's eyes gleamed. I accuse this Omega of placing an enchantment in your ear, Majesty, of using whatever unnatural sense she possesses to twist what the gods decreed, and of using her scent to bind you as Omegas do, clouding your judgment. How else are we to explain your sudden attachment? His gaze slid to her, sharp with satisfaction. You summon her in private. You defend her in council. You allow her to stand where no maid should stand. At your side. Heat climbed her neck. A murmur of interest rippled through the hall. The accusation was poison wrapped in truth. Alexander's eyes found hers. For a heartbeat, the hall fell away. She saw the question there. Do you want me to end this? To silence them? No, she thought. The word loud in her chest. Not yet. My king, she said, and the title tasted different now. Less distance, more plea. May I speak? He hesitated, then inclined his head. You may. All those faces turned toward her like flowers to the sun, except there was no warmth in them, only hunger. Her knees wanted to give, her throat wanted to close. 100 lessons in smallness screamed for her to bow, to weep, to beg. She did none of those things. She straightened her spine instead. You ask why I touched him? She said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I will tell you. Harrow snorted. We know why. Power. Ambition. A chance to wrap a king around your... I am tired, she cut in, the words rising like a wave that had waited too long to break, of watching a good man suffer while cowards profited from his weakness. The hall went still. She had never called him good aloud before. The truth of it made her chest hurt. I have served in houses where broken men ruled, she went on. Men who twisted their pain into cruelty, who used whatever power they had to grind others under their heels. Alexander is not such a man. He was given a kingdom and a cage at once, this hall, these walls, and silence wrapped around his head like iron. She looked at Harrow, at the ring of lords beyond him, and you all learned how to use that silence, how to speak without being heard, how to sell his deafness as destiny, while it kept you safe from the sound of your own lies. A stir of anger rippled the crowd, not because she was wrong, but because she was not supposed to say it where the torches could hear. "You claim I cast an enchantment," she said. "But when I removed that thing from his ear, what happened? Did the sky darken? Did the moon bleed? No, the world did what it has always done. It made noise." She turned to Alexander then, her voice softening without her permission. He heard his own breath, his own name. "The sea against the cliffs that have guarded his family for generations. That is not witchcraft. That is what should have been his since birth." She swallowed, feeling the first crack in her composure. "You want to know why I risked touching him without leave? Eyes. So many eyes. Alexander's most of all, because I knew I might die. I have seen what happens to Omegas who forget their place. I knew that one misstep could see me thrown from these walls and forgotten before my body hit the rocks." Her voice wavered, then steadied, riding the tremor like a wave. "And still, when I saw him, this man you call king, sitting in a hall full of voices he could not hear, carrying a burden he had never been allowed to understand, one look was enough." She took a breath that scraped her lungs raw. He was worth saving. The last word broke on her tongue. A sound escaped Alexander, too contained to be a gasp, too ragged to be a laugh. She did not dare meet his eyes now. If she did, she might say everything. She might tell them all that she loved him, that the thought of him locked back into silence hurt more than any noose. "Worth," Harrow repeated, latching onto the word like a leech. "You speak as if you sat in judgment over him." No, she shook her head, tears burning behind her eyes. "I speak as someone who understands what it is to be voiceless. I did not judge him. I saw him drowning in quiet and I reached." The tears escaped then, hot tracks down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. "Let them see. Let them hear. If you must accuse me of something," she said, and now her voice crackled like dry wood catching flame. "Accuse me of that. Of refusing to stand still while a king was kept half alive for your convenience. Of choosing action over fear." Her gaze swept the circle, catching on each face, daring them to look away. "I broke the rules of station and propriety and pride. I touched what many of you believed untouchable." Her throat closed on the next words. She forced them through anyway. "I did it knowing it could cost me my life. And if that is what this hall decides, if you choose to kill me for helping him, then so be it." Her voice cracked cleanly on that last syllable. The sound rang up into the rafters and down into the stones beneath her feet. "I would rather be executed for trying to give my king back what was stolen from him," she whispered, "than live out another day knowing I saw his suffering and did nothing." Silence fell. Real silence for once. Not the hollow quiet that had wrapped Alexander all his life, but a held breath awaiting. Every eye swung to the dais. To him. She finally looked, too. Alexander stood at the edge of the step, knuckles white at his sides. His gaze was fixed on her with a fierceness that made her knees want to fold. Not in fear this time, but in something far more dangerous. He had heard every word. The question hanging over them now was simple and terrible. What sound would a king make in answer? The silence after her words was the loudest thing she had ever heard. No one moved. No one breathed. Or if they did, she could not hear it over the rush in her own ears. All that existed was the dais, the throne, and the man standing on it, staring down at her as if she had split his chest open and laid his heart on the stone. Alexander took one step down. The sound of his boot on the stair rang like a struck bell. "Verdict," her fear whispered. Another step. Leather against stone. A soft scrape she had come to know in dark corridors and quiet rooms. Each footfall brought his scent closer. Steel, smoke, and something uniquely him. sharp and clean beneath it all. Her throat tightened. By the fourth step, her vision had begun to blur. She kept her chin lifted anyway. If he chose to cast her out, she would meet it standing. She had broken his silence without permission. He owed her nothing. He stopped in front of her. So close the edges of his cloak brushed her dress. From this angle he towered, every inch the Alpha King carved into stories. The hall watched, 1,000 eyes hiding 1,000 wishes for her death, for her banishment, for her humiliation. Alexander's gaze moved over her face, taking in the tears, the set of her jaw, the way her hands shook at her sides. His own hands opened and closed once, as if he were steadying himself against some unseen current. Then he did something no one in that hall expected. He reached for her. His fingers found her hand, rough and warm, closing around it firmly enough that the tremor running through her had no choice but to still. Gasps rippled outward like thrown stones hitting water. "Look at them," he said quietly, though the sound carried easily to the furthest pillar. "Listen, Ivy." She did. The murmurs were no longer smug, no longer gleeful. They were shocked, disbelieving, edged with dawning fear. Alexander turned, still holding her hand, and faced his court. "You have heard her," he said. "Now you will hear me." His voice rolled through the hall, deeper and more certain than she had ever heard it. This was a man who finally believed his words reached their mark. "You speak of enchantments," he went on. "If there is any witchcraft at work here, it was done long before she ever set foot in this fortress." His gaze swept the lords, cold as winter. "Someone placed a foreign thing in my ear when I was a child. Someone paid to keep me deaf, to keep me ignorant of the sound of my own people, my own enemies, my own name." A shiver passed through the crowd. No one spoke. "I have listened," Alexander said. "Harsher now. Not just with my newly opened ears, but with the skills you all taught me in silence. How to read fear, how to smell guilt." His eyes caught and pinned Harrow, who flinched despite himself. Ivy did not twist the god's decree. She tore out a man-made chain disguised as fate. He lifted their joined hands just enough that everyone could see. "The only magic she used," he said, voice softening around the edges, "was courage. She touched a king with no promise of reward, no protection, knowing it might mean her death." His jaw flexed. "How many of you can say the same? How many of you have risked your lives to give me something rather than to take something from me?" No one answered. Torches snapped in the hush. Somewhere a banner creaked. "This trial is over," Alexander declared. "If you want witches, look among those who profited from my maiming, not among those who mended it." He released her hand only long enough to turn back to her. "You will not be punished," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "You will not be cast out. From this day forward, anyone who moves against you moves against their king." The words wrapped around her like armor and a collar all at once. Protection and claim in the same breath. He squeezed her fingers once more, then led her from the center of the hall up the steps to the dais. The murmur began again behind them. Not triumph this time, but the restless whisper of a story changing shape. She could feel their eyes burning between her shoulder blades as she walked beside him. A voice beside the throne. They would call her. A dangerous place for someone who had spent her life trying to be invisible. When the doors finally closed behind the last lord and the echoes faded, Alexander sagged against the throne as if the stone were the only thing holding him up. The great hall, emptied of bodies, hummed with residual noise only he could hear. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Her hand still tingled where his had held it. "I should have done more," he said at last. voice low. They will not stop with whispers. You did enough, she replied, surprised to find her voice steady again. You made them afraid of the right thing. And what is that? You. She managed a small smile. A king who finally hears them. Something flickered in his eyes. Pain. Pride. Something tender that made her want to look away and never look away again. Ivy, he murmured. Yes, Your Majesty. He swallowed. The sound of it was somehow loud in the emptied hall. Then, slowly, he stepped down from the dais until they stood on the same level, stone beneath both their feet instead of between them. To her shock, he sank to one knee, then the other. Stop that, she whispered, horrified. You cannot kneel to me. Why not? His gaze never left her face. You were willing to die for me. Should I not at least bend for you? His hands closed gently around her wrists, as if afraid she would bolt. The sight of a kneeling king made her head spin. When you stood there, he said softly, in front of all of them, telling them you would rather be executed than stand by in silence. Do you know what I heard? Treason? She tried for humor. It came out thin. Life, he said simply, for the first time. The sound of it in my own chest meant something. It matched yours. Her throat tightened. I have heard many things since you freed my ears, he went on. Waves, storms, steel, lies. But your voice, he shook his head, almost helpless. Your voice is the first sound that ever made me feel truly alive. The hall seemed to tilt around them. I could order you to stay, he said. I am king. I command armies. I could wrap your future in edicts and call it protection. His grip on her wrists loosened, his next words coming out rough. But I am so very tired of taking things that are not freely given. He looked up at her. This fearsome, silent legend of a man who suddenly had too much sound in his world and chose, in this moment, to offer all his power to an Omega. So I am asking, Alexander said, not as your king, but as the man you decided was worth saving. Will you stay by my side? Not as a maid, not as a tool, but as... He exhaled, the word clearly difficult. As mine. She could feel the shape of her answer in every part of her, in the way her pulse leapt at his nearness, in the way her palms itched to touch his face, to smooth the furrow from his brow, in the way the idea of walking away now felt like slicing her own soul in half. Fear rose one last time, hissing all its old warnings about courts and leverage and how easily an Omega could be turned into a weapon. But love rose too, quieter and infinitely stronger. I do not know how to be anything but afraid here, she whispered, but I know how to be stubborn, and I know how to listen. She lifted her hands from his and set them against his cheeks. His stubble rasped warmly against her palms. He leaned into the touch as if he had been waiting for it all his life. I choose you, she said. The words rang like a vow. I choose the danger and the beauty, and whatever storms come with you. I will stay if you promise to let me keep teaching you to listen. His breath shuddered. To the court, to conspirators, to the world, she said. Her thumbs brushed the line of his jaw, bold now, claimed by the choice she had made, and to your own heart when it says things your pride does not want to hear. A rough sound left him. Half laugh, half broken exhale. His hands rose, circling her waist, drawing her closer. Teach me then, he murmured. Omega, she whispered back. Listen. And she kissed him, softly, carefully, as if he were another new sound she was introducing him to. His lips were warm and hesitant at first, then sure as he leaned up into her. The hall, the court, the dangers waiting outside the doors, all of it fell away beneath the thunder of their joined hearts. When they finally parted, his forehead rested against her belly, his arms banded around her. She threaded her fingers into his braids, feeling the tremor still running through him. "We will make them listen. He said quietly. To you. To us." She looked down at him, the Alpha King who had been born into silence and chose, in the end, to kneel for love, and felt something like hope settle over the stones. "Then we begin," she said, "with this story.